In the next edition of It's About Money, my guest will be Wayne Goodman. He's the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York. Please join us in that conversation. Hello and welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nanette Nocon and thank you for joining us. In our show right now, we're privileged to have our guest to be Wayne Goodman, and he's the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York. Wayne, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I've been looking forward to this program, and I wanted to know more about the Landmark Society and what it does.
Well, yeah, sure. The Landmark Society of Western New York was founded in 1937, and this year we're celebrating our 75th anniversary, and that makes us one of probably the three oldest preservation organizations in the country, which is quite an amazing accomplishment when you stop and think about all the different preservation organizations around the United States. So the Landmark Society was founded basically to preserve our historic resources and to encourage their preservation, to help people, to give technical assistance, and to really bring old historic buildings into our modern lives and have them sort of be a part of our modern lives and adapt them to new uses that would be compatible with today's standards.
I see. That would make sense because you'd want the look of it and feel of it to be the same, but then you'd want to be able to include technology and what other...
Sure. You know, oftentimes if you think about it, 150 years ago, we didn't have the indoor plumbing. But of course today we have to have that. And so I always tell people that just because a structure is old doesn't mean you can't have your indoor theater, doesn't mean you can't have your gourmet kitchen. You can have all of that. But you're right, you want to take a look at the main historic components of the building or structure, and then try to adapt that and make it work for our modern lives.
So imagine in terms of landmarks, most of them are buildings, but you mentioned resources. Does that mean then there are what other types of landmarks? I mean, it may be obvious with canals and stuff, but could you share that with our...
Yeah, I think that over the years, the whole preservation profession has expanded. And way back whenever Mount Vernon was preserved, it was really focused primarily on homes of great military leaders or homes that had something to do with the president. You've probably heard, you know, the phrase "Washington slept here," and so since that time, it's really evolved into now. I think it's much more of a strategic viewpoint of our historic resources, and that would be, as you point out, it would be much more than just houses or buildings. It could be bridges. It could be any type of statuary, artwork, historic landscapes, the canals. So it's those types of resources. Primarily we, as the Landmark Society of Western New York, primarily we work in what we call the built environment. So we're primarily focused on architecture, and we're primarily focused on buildings, but it doesn't mean that sometimes we sway away from that.
So what led to the formation of the Landmark Society of Western New York? So Western New York actually first defined for us what the area that it covers, and then what brought about the formation of the organization?
Our service area is basically the Western New York area, with the exception of a couple of counties around Buffalo. And then our service area extends all the way down into the southern tier. And it does not extend all the way to Syracuse, but just west of the Syracuse area. So it's a fairly large area in Western New York. It doesn't mean that those boundaries are rigid. They're somewhat flexible. If our services are needed and there's a need, then we will obviously go past those boundaries. But for all intents and purposes, those are the boundaries. And the organization was founded in 1937. Primarily, at first, it was to focus on specific structures. For example, the Ellwanger estate, which is on Mount Hope in Rochester, was a property of concern, and Helen Ellwanger was one of our founders. Later on, we became much more of an advocacy-focused organization. When the Inner Loop was built, for instance, our organization was the primary organization and the lead community advocate to preserve what's now commonly referred to as Cornhill. And at the time it was the 3rd Ward. Well, it still is the 3rd Ward, but it's referred to as the Cornhill Historic District.
I see.
And so even today when you drive on the inner loop and 490, there's a couple of jogs in the road that people probably don't really think too much about, and those are there because of the compromises in order to preserve and save Cornhill.
I see.
So really I think that it was probably founded, although I wasn't there, but it was probably founded on a mission of preserving very specific landmarks, but it didn't take too long for that to evolve and become much more broadly focused.
I see. That's great, because then there's progress in terms of building roads and highways, but then on the other hand, you have to protect.
That's right.
Some of the communities.
It's a balance. It's always a balance.
Yeah, so it makes this country great, I think. I think it's wonderful. So tell me about some of the services that the Landmark Society of Western New York do for the community.
We have a wide variety of services, and during this recession it's been a little difficult to maintain all those services, but we've been successful in doing that. We have various educational programs that we provide. We do numerous workshops on how to appropriately care for your historic home or how to best maintain a historic building. We have the largest, by far, Historic Preservation Conference in New York State. We have a children's program that's extremely popular in Rochester during Black History Month called Walk the Walk, and that's held at the Hochstein School of Music. We have a very popular, fun, and yet it's a fundraiser for us called Ghost Walk, which a lot of people are familiar with, that we have in October. And it's a fun way to hear some of the legends and lore of the area, and at the same time focus in on historic areas and give people walking tours. We do all kinds of walking tours. We do presentations. We will go out and do on-site free technical assistance for homeowners or business owners that may not know exactly what to do with their historic buildings, how to best maintain them. Sometimes people call up and wonder what kind of contractors they should be calling. We'll give that advice. We provide advocacy. We run a program with the City of Rochester called Rochester City Living, and that's to encourage folks to consider living within the boundaries of the City of Rochester, and primarily focusing on some of the historic districts there.
I see.
So there's a wide range of programs, and that's just sort of touching on some of them.
Oh, that's great. So really someone who already owns a building or a home that's historic, that you're a great resource for them to maintain the integrity.
I would like to think so. I think a big question that's come up, I think more so recently, has been the question of historic windows because of the whole energy conservation debate.
Yes.
And so people oftentimes will call us and wonder, should I keep these historic windows? Should I replace them with new windows? What's the benefit there? And so we'll go out on site and take a look at those historic windows and try to give some impartial advice, as opposed to if you call the window company, they're going to come out and they may have a little bit of biased advice. We come in and give completely impartial advice on that question.
I see. So it's neither direction, it's just telling them how it could change the look and...
Yeah, and from a financial standpoint too, if you look at old wood windows that maybe need to be reglazed and repaired, you might be talking maybe a couple $1,000 job, perhaps.
Per window.
Yeah, and well, no, I think that I'm talking about if you just need to reglaze them, you don't need to do any major work on it. It's a fairly minor repair.
Okay.
And so if you have a couple $1,000s that would go into those windows versus replacing all those windows at maybe a $15,000 to $20,000 bill,
sure,
then you have to figure out how much savings are you going to be getting in energy. And oftentimes we find that you would have to be alive for 200 years to make up the difference. So it's being smart about those kinds of financial decisions. And obviously there's times when you go and the windows are falling apart and it doesn't make sense to save those windows. And then you start talking about, well, how can we replace these windows and still maintain the basic look of the structure?
Got it. And so if a homeowner did that, do you charge a fee for service, or do they make a
No.
donation, or it's just...
No, we try to provide those types of technical assistance services for free. Obviously, we love for people to join our organization and be a part of what we do and help support what we do, but those types of technical assistance calls, we really try to do that for free, and that's a great benefit for the folks of Western New York. I think people don't really truly understand that our organization is fairly large when compared to many of the preservation groups in the country, and we're able to do that sort of work, whereas other organizations simply can't do it. In other states, you'd probably have to call a preservation consultant. You have to pay them an hourly fee to come out and do that type of work.
I see, but you're able... Now, what does large mean in comparison to the others? Help me define that. I mean, do you have staff? You mean...
Right, yeah, we have a staff of about 13. Sometimes it varies depending on, sometimes we have some seasonal employees and some part-time employees that come and go, but we have a staff between 13 and 15.
I see.
And there's entire statewide organizations that only have 1 or 2 staff people.
Oh, goodness.
So we're able to take a section of New York and focus on that section with a decent-sized staff.
Right.
And because of that, we're able to offer all of these programs and services.
That's great. And then the classes that are held, the educational programs, are those also free, or they have a, I mean, how do you offer them?
Sometimes they are free.
Okay.
Sometimes the workshops are free. Sometimes there's a fee. We also do one of the programs that's very successful is that we have a real estate seminar. And so real estate agents who are looking to get their credits for licensure, we offer a program, and they can obtain those credits, and it's a historic real estate program.
I see.
And there's a fee attached to that, and then they're able to get the renewals, I guess, for their license.
Sure, and they'd pay that anyway,
Right.
regardless. I see. Okay, so it really depends. Now, how do you fund the organization? Are there state?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
If you have any advice, I'd take how you fund the organization.
Okay. You have a big staff, but I mean, it sounds like you're providing a lot of services. But how do you get money in?
It's a challenge. I think that first of all, I would say that this particular organization is very fortunate to have had people in Western New York who for decades have cared about this organization, and people have been very generous over the years, and they've given money, they've put us in their wills and their planned gifts and their estates. And so we have an endowment that we're able to draw off of. The endowment is far too less. It's not enough to maintain our operations. So then we depend on memberships. We depend on contributions from individuals and corporate partners, and it's a battle, and especially with the recent downturn in the economy, it's been a struggle. We've had to reduce our staff, we've had to cut our operating budget, but we haven't. Fortunately, we've reduced our staff, and I have to just really compliment our staff because we've really risen to the occasion. We haven't cut any services to the community. Staff has doubled up, and we've worked longer hours in order to maintain those services.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. And then do you have fundraising programs as well? I mean, is the Ghost Walk, for example, a fundraising effort?
We do. And Ghost Walk is a fundraiser that we have every year. Sometimes it's 2 weekends out of the year, and sometimes it's one. Last year was only 1 weekend, but it is a fundraiser. And all of those programs where we offer that there's a fee to it, it really helps our bottom line.
Sure. Oh, that's great. That sounds good. I mean, it's nice to know that you can, that there's a substantial enough organization and can reach out to a lot of different organizations, buildings. Because many of these buildings, when they call you for assistance, they're not required to do that, right? But they just need
no,
help.
not at all. Not at all. And I think that's a big misconception sometimes, is that because of a lot of the zoning laws that are local, zoning laws, I think that residents sometimes feel like the Landmark Society, and our name probably doesn't help with the term landmark in the name. I think that people sometimes feel as if they need to maybe call us if they own a historic home to somehow get permission to do something, and that's completely not the case.
Okay.
It's just not the case. We have no regulation over what people can or cannot do to their properties.
Nice.
We can provide advice. And if it's a project that rises to the level of where we feel like it is of dramatic community importance, then we'll probably shift into an advocacy role where there's significant local support. But as far as a legal entity that has some type of control over what people do to their properties, we just simply don't have that.
I see. Okay, so it's really more.
We
of
don't want
advice.
that.
Yeah, right.
So-
That could be more of a
Yeah,
battle
yeah.
in some cases. Great. We'll take a quick break. My guest is Wayne Goodman, who is the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York. We'll be right back.
Any questions?
What kind of service plan does this come with?
Unlimited.
Can I keep my same phone number?
Absolutely.
How do I change the ringtone?
Just hook it up to your computer.
Does it have a camera? What's the warranty? Does it come in silver? Can I put my party shuffle on this? Does it have a 3.5 millimeter headset jack? You sell a lot of these?
It's the one I carry.
You ever get those phantom vibrations in your pocket?
Any questions?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Ask questions. For the 10 questions everyone should know, go to ahrq.gov.
And we're back. I'm Nanette Nocon, and my guest is Wayne Goodman, Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York. Thanks again for being here,
Well,
Wayne.
thank you.
So we talked about the fact that there are no covenants or restrictions for a lot of the historic homes and buildings in town, at least with regards to your organization. Help me understand, or for our viewers to understand, what is the economic impact of having the Landmark Society? What does it do for our community?
Well, I think that that's a great question, and I think that that's probably the one particular component in preservation that people fail to really think through. And I understand why. I think it's easy for preservation to be all too often lumped into the history category, where we're trying to, quote, save history. And that's part of it. That's certainly part of what we're trying to do. But there's a method to that madness sometimes. And that's an economic benefit. And people, I think, should really stop and think before we demolish one of our historic resources, being a building, in this particular case, or in this example. Because let's assume that you have a building that has been, let's say, vacant for 10 or 15 years. And let's assume that it needs substantial rehabilitation. But in order to demolish the building, it may cost $50,000 to demolish that building. It might make sense to really try to think of that in a different way. And if it costs $200,000 to rehab that building, but in doing so, you create all these jobs. Maybe you create, after the building's rehab, there's 3 or 4 local businesses that start because of that project. And then the building gets put on the tax rolls. And so from the standpoint of if the property is owned by a local government, it makes all the sense in the world for them to even if they gave the building away, they save all of that money in demolition.
Sure.
They get a building completely rehabbed, so they have all of these jobs just to rehab the building, and then they have businesses that move in. Those businesses pay taxes. The people who are employed there are going to pay taxes, and then the building itself pays property taxes. So not only is the local unit of government saving money in outright demolition, they're making money by the tax base. And I think that the other thing to consider is that that building, since it is historic, it's probably a one-of-a-kind structure. It can't be found anywhere else. And I think in an era where a lot of our new construction, not all of it, but a lot of our new construction becomes very similar from one community to the next, I think it's important that we balance that with our unique historic structures. And I think if you look at the data, especially from the younger generation that's coming in to the professional ranks, those people expect both. They want their McDonald's, they want their Targets, but they also want a choice, and they want to be able to go to have meaningful, unique experiences in historic buildings. And I think we have to have both, and that's what we try to show. We try to show the economic side of reuse of these buildings.
I see. That's great. You know, one building I used to drive by all the time was the One Mount Hope building, which I thought, oh, this is decrepit. But if I remember correctly, and I hadn't done research for our show, that the city sold it for $1, and then they rehabbed it. Now it's an office building for the past couple decades.
Yeah, and I think that building is, if it's not on the market now, I think it's going to be on the market relatively soon.
I see.
But that's a great example, and there's plenty of examples in Rochester. Rochester's done a good job, and not just Rochester, but the metro area, has done a good job of what we call adaptive use, where we take these old buildings and we sort of retrofit them, and they become new uses. I was just in Palmyra last night, and the old fire station in Palmyra now serves as their village hall.
Oh, nice.
And it's a great example of how they're able to have a building that suits their modern needs, and yet from the outside, it really portrays this extremely unique quality that's truly Palmyra. And more and more, that's what people want. I'm not saying that people, again, don't want growth.
Sure.
I think we have to have growth. I think we have to balance the two. We can't have one without the other.
Sure. If the aesthetics can be kept, then you have the historical perspective.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's true. I believe that.
Yeah. So if someone's buying a house, say in the market of looking at a house that has historic value, how can would they approach you? What kind of service would they have?
Yeah, I mean, if someone is considering purchasing a historic home, they could certainly call us if they had any questions about that home. If they had questions about is the siding in good condition. We don't do appraisals, but we could certainly come out and give any type of advice. We also help real estate agents who may not truly understand how to write the descriptions.
I see.
Maybe they're not familiar with historic architecture, or they're not sure what kind of components within that historic structure might be the most marketable for people who really love these homes. You know, the other thing to keep in mind about these structures, and homes in particular, is the fact that now people can live anywhere on the globe as long as they have an internet connection and a laptop, and even today a cell phone. You know,
right.
They can live anywhere and they can do business and they can open up their own businesses. And so we are experiencing a very competitive market to get people to live in our communities and to grow business in our communities. And when we take a look at those demographics and find out, what do these people want? What do people who start businesses, what do they want? And one of the main components of what they want is they want a unique experience. And they want historic structures to really survive in tandem with the new structures.
I see. Very
And I think if we're looking toward our future and our economic viability, we have to make sure that we plan for that.
I see. That's nice. It's nice to have that insight, you know, in terms of what's needed and what people are looking for and what's really right in the long run. It'd be a shame to have demolished a number of buildings. That I think the one that people always talk about is the old train station.
Oh, I know.
It breaks everyone's hearts.
I've only been in Rochester for a year, and I hear that constantly, is that it comes up and folks say, we really, really should not have demolished that Claude Bragdon, architect Claude Bragdon depot. And I've seen photographs of it, and it is truly amazing. And if we had that, could you imagine what a draw that would be for people to come to see that structure?
Yeah, just even get off the train for a bit and see what it's like.
Right. It would be a great draw. And so now people lament that loss. And so what we try to tell folks is before we lose a historic structure that we can never replace, these structures, we can't replace them. It's far too expensive to replace them today if we had to build them from scratch. And sometimes the materials are simply non-existent anymore. We can't get those materials.
Sure.
So they're of such high quality that once we lose them, we can't replace them. And we have to be very, very cautious whenever we take one of these buildings down. And we just try to let people know what the ramifications are if that happens.
Sure.
And sometimes the economics, you know, it's not there. I mean, as much as we would like to save everything, we can't. As a community, we can't, just simply because of the costs involved.
Sure. I mean, if you have a buyer, an owner of a building that has, or a structure that has the resources, then it makes it a nice gift to the community if that happens.
Right. Yeah.
Speaking of which, recently there's been some renovations done with the Frank Lloyd Wright House, which is everybody's really excited about. Can you talk about that? And how does the Landmark Society, how did you get involved in that process?
Well, that property was purchased by two people. Fran Constantino and his wife Jane Parker purchased that property, and we had been involved in helping preserve the site for decades. And that was that building was built in 1908, and it's an amazing design. It's a fairly early Frank Lloyd Wright design. It's what's called prairie style architecture. and it's the easternmost prairie-style building. And we've provided technical assistance ongoing. We help them go before the Preservation Board with the City of Rochester to gain approval, the permitting process that you need for the construction end of it. We helped with some architectural work on that property. And when they started pulling some pieces off, they found out live termite damage. There was major structural damage. So we, in a way, helped. A great board member of ours, Jean France, is an architectural historian, and she helped also track down some research to help the homeowners do a fantastic restoration of that property. WXXI is doing a documentary. We're working with WXXI on that documentary. And we own the original furniture for the house, which is very rare. To own a complete set of original Frank Lloyd Wright furniture that was designed for that home specifically it might be the only example of a privately owned home where that takes place. So the furniture, we have an agreement with the homeowners that the furniture will be put back in the house. And then every so often per year, we will have the home open for different events and functions and parties or tours or something, so the community can take advantage of it and see it.
I see. So when you have a situation where you own furniture, which is a unique situation.
It is unique, yeah.
Do they pay you for leasing the furniture? How does that go?
Well, what they do is, in a way they do, what they have to do in order to use the furniture, they have to pay for all of the insurance.
I see.
And the furniture is fairly valuable.
Yes, I imagine.
So insurance is quite expensive. So they pay for the insurance in that particular case, and then they have to secure the furniture, and then any of the ongoing maintenance to this furniture, which this furniture, you can't just sand the top of it and throw some Minwax stain on it. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and they pay for any of those types of needs that the furniture would have over the years, and then they open up the home, so every so often,
sure,
so we can utilize the home. So it's a great trade-off, and we're fulfilling our mission because the Frank Lloyd Wright furniture is unlike furniture in any other home. This furniture was built and designed specifically as an architectural component to that specific house.
Well,
So our mission to do what we can to preserve the original character of the home, it's very important for us to get that furniture back in there if we can.
Sure, absolutely.
And so it's a wonderful opportunity, and Jane and Fran have been great partners to work with, and we're looking forward to the completion of it, which hopefully will be relatively soon.
Sure, that's great. Yeah, I've seen some of the footage at WXXI
Right.
document, and I thought, wow, that's amazing how they separate each of the glass from a stained glass window
Yes.
to clean it and put it all back.
There's over 250 windows in that property, and a lot of people don't understand that, and just the craftsmanship with the leaded to put all those pieces together is almost unfathomable.
Right? It's almost like every part of the house is an piece of art.
It is, you're
So-
right.
And when the furniture, so now I understand the furniture is sort of leased without monthly payments, but all the costs associated with
Right,
it.
there's payments, it's just not you're right, yeah.
Right.
And that there's a dining room in the Boynton house that Frank Lloyd Wright himself claimed to be one of his favorite spaces he ever designed.
I see, okay.
And it's a fairly awe-inspiring space.
That's great, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Wayne, thank you so much for sharing all this information that I didn't know about the Historical Landmark Society and all the historic work that you guys do, and inform people and let them know about how to preserve and use their space that they're buying or have purchased already.
Well, Annette, thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you do for the community as well.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, our guests, for listening and watching us today. My guest was Wayne Goodman, who is the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York. Until next time, I'm Nanette Nokan.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you have any questions for It's About Money, please email Nanette at nnocon@aol.com. This program was produced through Penfield Community Television in Penfield, New York.